Hi there, I'm Conor Quillen. I am a wild food enthusiast and a foraging guide, and I am based in Belfast, but I work all over Northern Ireland showing others how to identify wild ingredients in their local areas. So that's what we're going to do today, and we're going to be looking at things that are grown in winter. So it might seem that winter is a kind of a funny time to be a forager, things seem a bit bare, a bit scarce. And although it's not as fruitful as the kind of autumn season or summer season, there are definitely interesting things to find in winter, and certainly it can be a really useful time to learn things because some other different kinds of plants and fungi make themselves known better in this time of year when things are not overgrown. So we're going to take you around a couple of locations, starting in a kind of forest location. This is very typical of any of our kind of forest parks in Northern Ireland, and then we're going to go on to a coastal location and we're going to find some things there as well. Throughout this kind of talk, I'm going to show you how to identify things, and I'm going to talk about how you can use them as well. So I'm really interested in flavour. So we're going to find some really interesting, truly unique Northern Ireland flavours that are available at this time of year. The next plant that we're looking at is this. So this is an amazing plant to find at this time of year because it really straddles the seasons, this one. This is three-cornered leek. So leek, which means it's related to our allium family that we're already very familiar with. So that is scallions, onions, garlic, red onion, all that kind of big kind of allium family that are really delicious, that we use lots and lots in our cooking. So this is our wild version. So also related to wild garlic, and a lot of people think that this is called wild garlic, but this one is quite different. It does come out a little bit earlier, and also in my experience here it tends to have a bit of a longer season as well. So this is it surrounding me here. So we're in January, but this is really out and thriving at the moment. I actually find this back as early as September in this location as well, so do keep an eye out for it. So it's a bit of a tricky one to identify when you're learning, because it could be anything else that is growing up in the early springtime. So if you think about snowdrops or daffodils or even bluebells, you might think that this plant is it, but there's a couple of ways to identify it, and it's really easy. So one, called three-cornered leek because it has three corners. So if you roll the stem in your fingers, you'll feel those three corners, and you'll even be able to see it if you look at it as well. So hence three-cornered leek. And then secondly, and the most obvious one, and definitely the easiest way to identify it, is by smell. So cut a little bit like this. I've just used a little knife. Give it a smell and you'll not have any doubts. Smells like just beautiful fresh scallion, fresh zingy, oniony scent. And scallion is how I use this. So any way you use scallions, so that's to make champ, make pancakes, use it on top of a salad. You can eat this raw. Use three-cornered leek in the same way. This does produce a flower, so we're a wee bit early now. This produces a white flower that almost looks like a white bluebell at a glance. If you're walking past it, you might just assume it's a white bluebell because of the shape. But each of the petals on the flower will have a green stripe, so that's a way of identifying it. But it's that smell, that beautiful onion smell, that'll really, really sell it to you. This is really, really common in County Down. I find it everywhere once you kind of head out of Belfast City. So you'll be able to see these growing in these kind of big clumps like this along the roadsides, but also in kind of forest locations and coastal locations as well. So do keep an eye out for it. Super versatile, like I say, will last. In this location that I'm in now, it's here usually until about June time, so you get a long time to pick it. And also it's considered a bit of an invasive species as well, so the more we cut back, kind of better for the environment too, because it will kind of take over. As you can see, it's doing here now, so all the better for eating for us. So these are one of our winter mushrooms that we can collect at this time of year. These are called velvet shanks, and these are actually a new mushroom to me this year. I have been looking for them for a few years, and that's because mushrooms are really tricky. I'm certainly not a mushroom expert, but I knew after studying images and understanding where these grow and things like that, made it so I was sure when I found these that these were definitely velvet shanks. And that's what I recommend for you as well if you want to learn mushrooms and any wild plants, is really do your research. Spend a bit of time looking at things, observing, so you can be really confident when you find things like this. So I knew that these were velvet shanks, one, because of the time of year, so it's January. These mushrooms are not afraid of the cold, so they will very happily thrive right through from the end of September on until January, February time. A lot of other mushrooms kind of die back at this time of year. Two, I knew from looking at them as well, so that they've these beautiful golden brown colour, and there are a few other mushrooms that have this colour as well that are not edible. So one of them is sulphur tufts, which are a really common mushroom, grow in a similar habitat, like to grow on old trees, rotten stumps, things like that, but they're much more yellow and they have different colour gills due to their different colour spores. So if I turn one of these guys over, you'll see that their gills are very pale, almost white, but more like a kind of very faint pale yellow colour. Sulphur tufts have a grey or kind of greeny grey underside. The other one that you might confuse this with, and it would be very dangerous to do so, is with a mushroom called Galerina marginata, which is also called the funeral bell. The way to tell this apart is that the funeral bell has a ring, so you'll see that this mushroom doesn't have a ring, and also that it has rusty spores, so underneath will look like a rusty colour. So, but that's really not enough information. Make sure you really do your research. If you do find these, they're kind of a real treat. Another way to identify them is through their stem. So if I hold up maybe a kind of older one from this kind of little chunk, and you can see how they grow as well. So they grow in these kind of beautiful clumps. So these mushrooms will always kind of be paler at the top, and then as they mature they get this kind of darker browny colour towards the bottom, and also you can kind of see a kind of texture on them as well, and that's where they get their name from. So velvet shank, they're sometimes called velvet foot in America as well, because they have a kind of velvetiness on the bottom of them. So really beautiful mushroom. You can find them in kind of large amounts. I've seen quite a few of them already this year. They're very delicious. So their stems can be a little bit tough sometimes. A lot of people chop them off. I haven't tried these very many times, so I've been just using whatever I can find. So if they kind of still feel tender, especially when they're small like this, their stems will be nice and tender, so I wouldn't chop them off. And just use them as you would normal mushrooms. So delicious, fried up in butter. They have a lovely texture. You'll feel on the tops of the caps that they can feel a little bit slimy, so you can give them a little wipe down if you wish. It's not necessary though. Just take them, slice them up as you would, fry them in a little bit of butter. They have the most amazing nutty, kind of slightly sweet flavour. Really amazing just on a piece of toast, in a risotto, into a soup, even if you find them in large quantities. Super delicious. So these mushrooms are interesting as well. You may have actually already tried them. So these are the wild cousin, or wild version I guess, of enoki mushrooms, which you may have tried in kind of Japanese cooking, which is those long needle, kind of like almost like pinhead style mushrooms. They're white and they grow in clusters of this. So those mushrooms are cultivated. They are grown in an environment that encourages them to kind of stay pale and white, and grow in those clumps, so they're super attractive, and that's one of the reasons why they're kind of very well known, is because of their unique look. They're not as delicious as these. These have tons more flavour, and of course they're wild and they're completely free as well. The next thing we're talking about is another mushroom, and this is a really good mushroom to learn as a beginner, and it's one of the first mushrooms that I was able to identify really confidently. So this is called jelly ear, or sometimes called wood ear as well. A really common mushroom. Likes to grow, has a kind of preference for elder, which is I think what it is growing on here, but I know this is definitely jelly ear by its appearance. So one, jelly ear, so nice descriptive name. So if I take one of these off my knife here, you can see that texture. So just like a jelly, you'll feel it even has like a little stretch to it, almost like a rubber band kind of texture. And it's also called jelly ear for a reason as well. So you can nearly see that they grow almost like ears on here, and sometimes they are particularly ear-like, and they have lots of little kind of almost that look like veins growing through here. Seems kind of gross, and the texture can be a little bit off-putting for some people, but these are such a good one to learn because there's really nothing you can mix this up with. This is around for most of the year, but you can really notice it lots at this time of year, and you'll see lots of new growth as well coming through in kind of autumn time. These are a really common staple in Chinese cooking. So in fact, if you went to the Asian supermarket in Belfast, you could find a whole bag of these dried, and they're often called wood ears, or there's one called black fungus, which is a similar species. And they absolutely love these in China. They really like that kind of like gelatinous, kind of slightly kind of firm jelly texture. And they're used often in like things like spring rolls or in dumplings or in big noodle soups, and that's where I think they're best if you want to eat them as a mushroom. So take them home, slice them up as they are, give them a good cook in some stock, and you can eat them as they are just like that. What's also nice to do with them, because you can find them in large amounts, is take them home and dry them. So they don't have tons and tons of flavour, but if you dry them and then give them a little toast and grind them, you will get some mushroominess from them, and then that's a good base for like a stock or a soup. And I use them like quite commonly in that way, or even a kind of like a spice mix or a herb mix for sprinkling on top of things as well. But there are a couple of unusual things you can do with this as well. So these mushrooms, you'll very often find them completely dried out, and they'll almost seem like little bits of plastic. They go so hard when they're dry. These ones are all kind of plumped up because it's been fairly damp, but very often you'll find them attached and they'll be that kind of cracked plastic feel. When they're dried, you can reconstitute them with anything you like. So you can do that with something savoury. So there's a really wonderful forager I know called Mark Williams. He likes to reconstitute his in dashi. So they have that kind of intense savoury umami flavour in mushroom form, in this kind of jelly form. Or you can do something really unusual, which is was first done by another forager called Fergus Drennan, and he likes to reconstitute these in something like fruit juice or liqueur. So you can make like liqueur jellies with these mushrooms, and then dip them into chocolate. So like I say, you'll find these everywhere. Definitely by far the most common mushroom, edible mushroom that I can find, and a really, really good beginner one as well. The weather's changed and we're in the rain now, unfortunately. Fairly typical January weather for Northern Ireland, but what a treat to be in the rain and finding the very first wild garlic of the year. So it might seem a little bit early for wild garlic to be up, but I have found wild garlic in January for a few years in a row if you know the right places to go, and you can spot it from a mile off. These beautiful kind of lime green shoots coming straight up, beautiful peel colour at this time of year, this kind of early stage. This is what you call a simple leaf shape, so just kind of long and straight and pointed at the top. But your main key feature for identifying wild garlic, a bit like our three-cornered leek, which we already talked about, is the smell. So if you find one of these leaves that looks like this, just give it a little tear and you'll get that incredible smell of onions, garlic, allium, that scent that we are really, really familiar with. Really easy to pick that out. How to use wild garlic. I very, very rarely cook wild garlic. I like it raw. That's my favourite way to eat it. So use it as a herb, chop it up and mix it and make a garlic butter, make garlic bread, make it into a pesto. It's a real classic. Chop it up and put it into a soup base. You know, there's loads and loads of things you can do it. Just treat it as a raw herb because you'll get that best flavour. When you're collecting wild garlic, it's really important to think about sustainability and how to pick things. So it's actually against the law to uproot plants. And a lot of people think wild garlic and think of the garlic clove. It's a totally different plant. You treat it in a different way. The prize is really the leaves. So these are the leaves you're looking for. Do not be tempted to uproot the plant. What you want to do is go along with a pair of scissors and collect these leaves individually. Now there's two reasons for doing that. One, because you don't want to take all the leaves off a single plant. If you just take a few, it means the plant can keep on living. But secondly, you want to do that so you're being safe. There is one plant that comes up at this time of year, and it grows in similar areas and looks quite similar at this stage in its life. You want to be sure you're not collecting that as well, and we're going to talk about that shortly. The other plants that I mentioned, this is arum. So this is also a really common plant, grows in exactly the same environment as our wild garlic. And you might think, when I hold these up together, that you would never mix these two together. And you'd probably be right at this stage. So you can see arum is kind of an arrow-shaped leaf with two kind of tails at the bottom. But when it's younger and it's just coming up, it looks like this. So this kind of single shoot. And you can also see just here, these shoots too. So this is wild garlic and this is arum. And you can see how closely they are together, especially in this kind of shoot. That's one to look out for. So that's why you want to pick your wild garlic leaf when it looks like this, and not like this or this. You want to wait until it's fully open and pick them individually so you can be sure about what you're picking. The reason why you don't want to pick this is because it contains a compound which will have a really horrendous reaction in your mouth. It'll taste almost like pins and needles, like a burning sensation. You definitely don't want to get that into your pesto. So be sure when you're picking. This grows in exactly the same environment, like I say, but it's really easy to quickly identify it. Be sure about what you're picking, and it means you can't go wrong when you're going out for your wild garlic. We've discovered another mushroom. So this is one of my absolute favourites. It's a winter mushroom. It's only around at this time of year, has this tiny window, and it's amazing once you get into foraging, the kind of cycles that happen, and there's things that you kind of are waiting for, and this is one of them. So the common name for this is scarlet elf cap, which is also the most beautiful name. Scarlet obviously because of this colour, and elf cap, as you can imagine, are sometimes called elf cup because of this shape. So beautiful little cups, beautifully red on the inside, and then pale, sometimes pale pink, but mostly white on the outside. Like I say, they're only around at this time of year. You will find them on logs or sticks or bits of dead wood, stumps and things like that. You find them tend to be growing in lots of these like little colonies as well. So there's a real kind of long-standing belief that red equals danger, and that is the case for some things, but not the case for this. It looks like something that you shouldn't eat, but these are entirely edible. So in fact, some people eat them raw and they have a good mushroomy flavour. My preference for them is to gather lots of them and dry them and then grind them, and they dry and grind into the most beautiful colour. They lose a little bit of that kind of crimsony red colour. They become more of like a brick colour, but that has good mushroom flavour, and I've used that to kind of sprinkle on top of bread, sprinkle on top of like hummus and things like that for a bit of a mushroomy kick, and you get that beautiful colour as well. Absolutely one of my favourites. You'll find them growing virtually in any forest through really until the end of February, maybe even a wee bit later, and you'll find them in large amounts. They even grow a little bit bigger than this as well, but these are them in their kind of young stage, just in early January. Scarlet elf cups, definitely one of my favourite things to find. So we're at the beach now on a shoreline location, somewhere completely different, and we're going to see what we can find. So we're at the beach, it's super cold in a January morning, but we're collecting something that's really special and really nice to know and collect at this time of year, and that is pepper dulse, which is this really tiny seaweed. You'll find pepper dulse growing in large clumps along the rocks. You might find them a bit closer to the shoreline, so you might go further down than you would find other seaweeds that like to grow higher up the shore. It's really densely clustered and also incredibly small. It doesn't get much bigger than this, so you want to pick this with some scissors. It's really important that you pick all seaweeds really with scissors or a knife, because when you go to lift seaweed, they're very likely to rip off the rocks. This one is really, really special. One, because I've been looking for it for quite a while, so this year was the first year I'd found it, and I've been looking for it for about 3 years. And two, it has the most amazing flavour. It's really hard to describe. So a lot of us will be familiar with the idea of what seaweed tastes like. So like the sea, like very salty, have quite a strong umami flavour. This one has all that, but also it has a mushroominess, which is very hard to describe unless you were to try it. But very often this is called sea truffle, or truffle of the sea, because it has that mushroomy, earthy, complex and very kind of almost luxurious flavour, which makes it a very, very special condiment to add. So the most easy and simple way I can think of using this and all seaweeds is simply to dry it and crush it and use it as a sprinkle or as a condiment or a seasoning. So really, really good over like roast potatoes, or crush it up and put it into risotto at the end, or even just have a wee munch on it as you go as well, which is a really nice thing to do with seaweeds. So really, really special. Do keep your eye out for it. Now I've got 3 more seaweeds to talk about. So the first one is one that you may already be familiar with. This is a really commonly known seaweed in Northern Ireland, and this is dulse. So this is dulse in its lovely kind of wet, young stage, looking really gorgeous, really, really luscious. So all seaweeds like to grow attached to something. Most like to grow on rocks, but dulse actually likes to attach itself to other seaweeds. So you can see it here, it's hitching a ride on this kelp here, but you'll often find it also on racks, different kind of on egg rack or a serrated rack you'll find it growing, and it's really easy to identify. So beautiful, almost like translucent, kind of like a film, this lovely red purpley colour, and it has these little fronds that come off it as well, so that's a good way of identifying it. This looks really good and fresh, and that's when you want to pick seaweed. So you want to always try and pick seaweed when it's still attached to the rocks. You don't want to gather seaweed that is lying on the beach, because you really don't know how long it's been there, or you know where it's been either. So stick to live seaweed that's still attached, just like this, and it should look lovely and fresh and look quite appealing as well. The next seaweed that we're going to talk about is this one. So this is called gutweed, which is kind of an unpleasant name. It really comes from its scientific name, which is intestinalis, intestines, and that comes from the shape of this. So you can see it's kind of tubular, quite long, and this grows absolutely everywhere. This seaweed, you might recognize it. It's one of those ones that kind of grows over the top of rocks. It's one that you're trying to avoid when you're climbing over rocks, because it can be a bit slippy. This one has probably my favourite flavour, raw. So has quite a pleasant texture actually when it's raw. It's not slimy or anything like that, and has the most amazing flavour of the sea, really, really salty. Also dries really beautifully and keeps that colour, so you can use it to sprinkle into things, use as a condiment, and also it'll fry up as well, so and it'll keep that lovely green colour. There's a few different types of gutweed. There's this kind of finer one, and then there's one that's a bit broader, but both have a similar flavour, both grow in the same environments, and both are pretty easy to identify. And then the last one we're going to talk about is this one. So this is a really amazing seaweed, and it has a few names. It's called laver. It's also known as sloke in Ireland, but it's probably best known as the species of seaweed that nori sheets are made from. So this is the seaweed that gets pulped down and processed into making the sheets that wrap around sushi and used in lots of other kind of Japanese and Korean cooking. So really intense, kind of umami flavoured seaweed, really, really useful. This is one I like to collect in large amounts. You'll find it growing quite close to the rocks, almost like sheets of black plastic. And it dries really, really beautifully in these kind of beautiful sheets, and is amazing for crumbling into things. It really adds a big punch of flavour. Probably best thing I can think of using it is to make into furikake, which is a beautiful Asian dry seasoning, which is made from sesame seeds, garlic and seaweed, and you sprinkle it on top of rice, and it's absolutely delicious. So you can do that yourself using this seaweed. few plants that are really useful to know as a forager, and this is definitely one of them. This is sea beet. So as you can imagine, this is a seaside plant. There's quite a few of the wild seaside edible plants that begin with C. Just a kind of descriptor. It literally means, you know, beet that grows beside the sea, as simple as that. If you are a beetroot grower or a spinach grower, you'll recognise this kind of shape of leaf. So like an arrow kind of coming up into these kind of points at the end and a point at the top. And this is it growing here in the full plant. So really bushy, shrubby almost. You'll find it growing in these kind of large patches, and very often lots of the patches growing close together as well. So really, really easy to identify that way. These are, like I say, just like beetroot leaves, but they're a bit tougher. You'll feel that they're a little bit kind of leathery or almost like rubbery, kind of like succulent. And that is because they're nice and hardy to cope with these kind of difficult salty environment that we are over right beside the loch here. These are super delicious. So a lot of seaside plants get their flavour from being by the sea, so they pick up a little bit of that saline, sea salty deliciousness, and this is definitely one of the key ones. It has a neutral flavour otherwise, and then a little bit of that sea saltiness, so super delicious. I actually really like this one raw, although it seems, like I say, it was a bit leathery. It's actually kind of crunchy as well, so I'll use this and actually put it in a salad if I can find it quite young. This is a little bit more mature, so this one I would probably strip it of its stem and then slice that up, pop it into a stir fry, make it into some kind of dumpling, put it into like a lasagna or a spanakopita. Any way you would use kind of like hearty greens. So straight out swap for cabbage or spinach. Really, really tasty, just as nutritious as those ones as well, but obviously completely free. You'll find this growing on almost all shorelines in Northern Ireland.